'cause nobody does it like you. I like the way that you move. That's why I never go through with leaving you.
Assalamualaikum. In this episode, we are going to explain about breach of duty. Breach of duty means a defendant must not only owe a duty of care to the claimant, but also breach that duty. In a tort case, the injured party can seek compensation or other remedy for harm caused by the wrongful action of another party. Since breach of duty is one of the key elements in a tort claim, the claimant typically needs to prove that the action was exactly a breach of duty because the defendant failed to meet the required standard of care. But before we get into the legal issue and the court decision, it's important that we first understand what actually happened. So to break down the facts of the case and walk us through the events leading up to the dispute, I'll pass it over to Iman, who will take us through the background and the key facts of Rogers against Whittaker in more detail. Over to you.
Hey everyone, today let's talk about a really famous Aussie legal case, which is Rogers against Whittaker. Don't worry, I'll keep it simple. So, there was this woman, which is Mrs. Whittaker, and she had been almost blind in her right eye since she was a kid. But her left eye was healthy, which basically means she could see just fine with it. Naturally, she was super careful about anything that might put her eyesight at risk. Then, she went to see Dr. Rogers, an eye surgeon, who suggested surgery on her right eye. Mostly cosmetic stuff with maybe a tiny chance of improving her vision in that eye. Sounds okay, right? Here's the thing. There was a really rare risk called sympathetic ophthalmia. It could make her healthy left eye go blind, basically leaving her completely blind. The risk was tiny, like in 1 in 14,000, but if it happened, it would be catastrophic. And Dr. Rogers didn't tell her about it. And sadly, the rare risk happened. Her left eye went blind too, leaving her completely blind. She later said, "If I'd known about that risk, I definitely wouldn't have gone through with it." And that's when she decided to sue Dr. Rogers for negligence.
So now that we understand what happened between Dr. Rogers and Mrs. Whittaker, especially the issue surrounding the failure to disclose certain risks, so the next question is, what did the court actually have to decide? To help us unpack the legal issues involved and explain how the court reached its decision, I will hand it over to Una, who will take us through the issues and the judgment in Rogers against Whittaker. Over to you.
Hi guys, I'm the second speaker here. My name is Una. Today, I will explain the legal issue, court reasoning, and the last part is final decision of this case. Let's start with the legal issue in this case. The main issue was whether Dr. Rogers breached his duty of care by failing to warn Mrs. Whittaker about a serious risk involved in her eye surgery. Specifically, the court had to decide if the doctor was negligent for not informing her about the risk of sympathetic ophthalmia, which could cause blindness in her good eye. Even though the risk was rare, the question was whether the doctor had a legal duty to disclose it to the patient. Let's look at the court's reasoning. The High Court explained that a doctor's duty of care includes not only providing proper treatment, but also giving patients enough information to make informed decisions. The court stated that doctors must warn patients about material risk. A risk is material if a reasonable patient would consider it important, or if the doctor knows that the patient is especially concerned about it. In this case, Mrs. Whittaker was almost blind in her right eye and was very worried about losing sight in her left eye. She had asked many questions about the risk before agreeing to the surgery. Because of this, the court decided that the risk, although rare, was very important to her and should have been explained. The judge also rejected the idea that doctors could rely only on medical practice, like in the Bolom case. They said that when it comes to giving information, the court decided the standard, not the medical profession. Finally, let's look at the court's decision of this case. The High Court held that Dr. Rogers had breached his duty of care by failing to warn Mrs. Whittaker about the material risk. Because she was not properly informed, she could not make a fully informed choice about the surgery. As a result, the doctor was found negligent. The appeal was dismissed and Mrs. Whittaker was awarded damages. So, in conclusion, this case shows that doctors must inform patients about important risks, especially when those risks are relevant to the patient's personal situation.
Thanks for explaining the court's decision. What makes Rogers against Whittaker truly significant isn't just the outcome of the case, but the legal principle that came out of it. So now to explain the legal principle established by the case, why it matters, and how it impacted medical negligence law moving forward, I will pass it over to IFFAH. Over to you.
Hi everyone, as the first speaker, I'll be talking about the legal principle from Rogers versus Whittaker, a really important case in medical negligence law. As IMAN, our first speaker, have mentioned before about the story of Mary Whittaker. Now, here is the key issue. Dr. Rogers knew about this risk. It was rare, yes, but he didn't warn Whittaker about it. After the surgery, she was completely blind and she sued him for negligence. As Una, the second speaker, have mentioned before about the doctors must warn patients about the material risk. And what is a material risk? The court explained it like this. A risk is a material if a reasonable patient in Whittaker's position would want to know about it before deciding. Or if the doctor knows that this particular patient would consider it important, then it must be disclosed. This was a big shift away from the old volume test, which basically asked whether the doctor acted in line with what other doctors would do. Instead, the court said no, the focus should be on the patients. It is about what the patient needs to do, needs to know to make an informed choice. Why does this matter? Well, this case put the principle of informed consent front and center. Doctors cannot just rely on what is common practice among their peers. They have to think about the patient perspective. Even if a risk is rare, if it is serious and could change the patient decisions, it must be disclosed. And the influence of this case spread beyond Australia. In Malaysia, for example, the federal court in Fiona versus Dr. Su Fukman in 2007 followed the same principle. They rejected the volume test and adopted this patient-centered approach. So now Malaysian law also expects doctors to disclose material risks, giving patients the right to make truly informed decisions. So wrapping up, so the principle from Rogers versus Whittaker is clear. Doctors have a duty to warn patients of material risks, judged from the patient's perspective, not just medical standards. This case transformed medical negligence law and strengthened the patient's right to informed consent. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will raise my case.
And yeah, that's a wrap on this episode. Thanks to all our speakers for breaking it down so well, and thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in. Catch you in another episode.